Hey, hi guys. So, thank you everyone for joining over here. So, in this live stream, we are actually gonna see the advice app using an API, and we are gonna use React for it. But before going deep into it, let me give just a small intro about me. Myself, Anton Francis Gijo, and I've been, a full stack developer for more than half a decade, and I've been working across different institutions and different companies around the world, and I've also been a part of the Geeks for Geeks mentor team. And today I'm gonna try and share my knowledge on how to create a React project, and this project is gonna be a simple one because I'm just gonna try and keep as simple as possible. But if you guys have any questions, if you guys have any doubts, you can always shoot it in the comment section because I'm always open to answer all your questions. So let's get this live stream started, and I'm gonna share my screen. So let me press screen. Okay. So first thing first, we need to create a React application. If you're new to React, it's still fine. Just follow with me through this entire process. You'll understand what we are actually trying and building over here. Because some might feel like I'm completely a beginner. I don't have any idea like what's React, or I've never even worked anything with React. So can I do this project? Of course, you can do it. So because I'm just gonna explain each and everything. Still, if you never know React, it might be a little bit too technical for you to understand certain terms. But still, you can, if you follow this entire live stream with me, you can definitely build this project, and you'll have a complete React project by the end of the stream. So that's one thing I can assure you of. So let's talking more work. Let's see a small demo of our application. So first, let me create a new React app. So here, to create a new React app, we are actually going to use a tool which is called as White. There we go. So this is generally a front end tool which we use for not just for React applications. We use it like for different other libraries and frameworks too, mainly related to front end. And what generally White does is, so White is generally a front end tooling tool which we can actually use to build our applications. So let's say whenever I'm building, writing code in a React application, what happens is I write the code in the React syntax. So basically, in React, we use a syntax called as JSX. It's a mixture of JavaScript and a bit of XML. So XML is kind of the older version of HTML and stuff. So we use something called as JSX. So that is the syntax, and that is the kind of code we write in React. Generally, browsers can't run code other than the traditional HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So what happens is pretty much the code we are writing in React, which is the JSX syntax code, it is never gonna run in browser. Then how we can run it? So that is where the White tool comes into play. So what White does is whatever we are running here. So I could just show you small case over here. So let's say I'm running a React app. So what happens is whenever I'm running this React application, so let's say this is the React code I have, and this is the browser screen. So what happens is, so if I try and run the React code in my browser, it is never gonna run. This won't work. So this is where White comes into play. Basically, what White does is it takes the React code. So White takes this React code, converts it into normal HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code. So it just converts it into the basic HTML, CSS, JavaScript code. So whatever we write in React, it converts it into the this HTML, CSS, JavaScript code, and this code is then actually run in the browser. So this is how the white comes into play, in the React environment. So whenever, always remember this, whenever we write the code in React, it's never going to run in the browser. We need some kind of a tooling, to run the React code in the browser. That is what white does us for you. So in this case, we are going to use white and create a brand new React application. So if you just go to white, you can actually see get started over here. You can see like what are the templates they support, to which you can use white. You can see that like other than React, they have like Vue, Svelte, Quick, Solid, lot of other things, but of course we are going to use React. So let's stick with React for now. So after clicking React, you can see it just takes me to a completely new environment, a completely new website where they have a sample React code. But we can actually create a React app with this template, which is the npm create white at latest. I can copy this one. I'll just have a small folder. So I'll directly run this code in my VS Code. So over here, so Roshan, for this project, we are going to use React. It's not React Native or Expo because React Native is mainly for app. So here we are going to build a website pretty much. Maybe next time we'll try and build something for mobile app too. So here, let me create. I'll run the command npm create white at latest, which allows me to create a white application. So it's asking me to give a project name. So I'm going to say advice app. And here I can directly select a template. So whether I need a Vue.js application, a React, a P-React, Swell, whatever it is, so you can see it supports Angular. Pretty much most of the famous front-end libraries and frameworks, you can work with White. And I'm gonna use React, and we are gonna just stick with JavaScript. So I'll just select JavaScript, and the application is created. So you can see this will give me just a bare bone template of the React version code. So with this, I can obviously move forward because right now I have a sample React code. This code doesn't have anything much, but we can start building things along with it. In the meantime, I'll try and show you guys like what exactly we are going to build so that it might help us understand the application even better. So I'll just kickstart the already created version of this application so that you guys can have an idea like what exactly we are trying to build over here. So in the meantime, if you have any doubts, any questions, feel free to ask it in the comment section. So I'm just here to help you guys out, figure things out. So yeah, so whatever doubt you guys have, you can please shoot it in the comment section. And I guess got it. Yeah, Roshan, it's neither React Native CLI nor Expo as we are using uh, primarily React. just the barebone React. We are creating a React website over here. Let's see. Let's give us some colors. Right, should be good to go. There it is. So there, and I'm able to see the advice which is coming from there. So this is exactly what we are actually going to build. So if you see, basically, whenever I refresh the application gives me with the new. You can see, it just gives me a random advice. So once in a while, eat some sweets. You used to enjoy when you were younger. So likewise, whenever I go to the application newly, it gives me advice. At the same time, whenever I click the give me advice button, it also gives me an advice. Of course, this is just a sample version of the application. We are just going to build the application much better than this one, because you can see the text is so out, all these things flying here and there. This is just to show a demo of how it's going to work, but of course we are going to do it even better than this. So whenever I click the give me advice button, it just gives me a random advice every time. You can see it. Whenever I click, we can just literally see this out. So we are going to do it. We are going to create this. We are going to get random advices. We are going to have all these things, but it's going to be even better than this. So that's the best part of this live stream. So let's get started with our one. Okay, first let's try and understand what we have over here. So here, so in this screen, if you see, we have a React project created. But the main thing is we need to, because if you guys are new to React, then you might see what these files are, how you're going to get started. So I'll just give you a quick gist on what these files are and what are the purposes of these files, so that we can get started directly with the application. So first, the package.json file. This file is kind of like the heart of the application. Like how hot is the of course we have hot and brain. So like basically you can understand the comparison. So for a human, heart and brain are kind of the two most important things. So brain does all the thinking, and heart is the one which keeps us which keeps pumping and keeps us alive. So basically the package.json is kind of both the heart and brain of an application. So what it does is, it has all the core dependencies which are basically needed to run a React application. So as I already mentioned, to run a React application, lot of things are required. So you need the React library, you need other things to run this React project. So we call those things as dependencies. So you can see it over here, dependencies. So currently two dependencies are installed. One is the React library, React version 18, and React DOM library, which is also the same version 18. These two libraries are the core libraries to run any React application. So if you want to run a React application, you need these two libraries. These are the major things. Then we got the dev dependencies. So the difference between a dependency and a dev dependency is, basically dependencies are needed all the time. So without dependency, your application won't run anywhere. But dev dependencies are dependencies where, or which are needed only during the time of the development. So let's say once I'm done developing this project, do I need this after that? No, I don't need these dependencies. So these dependencies are only needed for the development of my application, whereas the dependencies are needed during the time of the development and even after the development. So that is the difference between the dependencies and dev dependencies. So then why we need the dev dependencies only during development and not during after that means, as I already mentioned, the white. So what white does is, it converts a React code into the HTML, CSS, JavaScript code to run in the browser. But let's say I'm done with the development and everything, then I actually don't need it even further. So after that, all I need is just the code, and that is pretty much enough, and that's what happens over here. So let me do it. Okay, let me go. I think what is this stuck? Got stuck. Got it. All right. So now basically what we are going to do is we understand the importance of the package.json file as the dependencies and their dependencies of the core thing. Then what are the other files of? Then let's come to the white.config. So basically this is the white's configuration. So whatever configurations I need to do with white, I'll do it over here. So any kind of configurations I do directly with the white, because white doesn't stop with React. It has a wide range of capabilities which white can perform. But here in our case, we are just using white for React tooling, because once it's done, just it's enough for us. So that's what we are doing here now. Let us see further. Then comes the index.html file. So this is kind of where we understand the how exactly the React application works in the browser. So what happens is whenever we write the code in React applications are also known as spa. Not the spa where you get the massages. It's just called as single page applications, which is also known as spa. So what exactly it does is, so basically, in React applications, not just in React applications, with lot of front end applications. So, so here we just have a single HTML file. Yes, it's right. You can see a lot of top companies websites built using React. For example, on top of my mind, I have few examples like Facebook, WhatsApp Web, Instagram. So these are websites which are built using React, and all these websites just use a single HTML file. Can you imagine it? But it is a true fact. The reason is that's how React works. As simple. Not just React, any front end tools, any front end libraries you take, for example, uh, Angular, Vue.js, all these things are single page applications. It uses just a single HTML file, and using that, uh, so here, the HTML file which we are actually seeing is the one which we have over here. So you can see the HTML file over here. So what basically happens is the you can see here source slash main.jsx. Inside the source folder we have this main.jsx file, where we have this app component from the app.jsx file being directly rendered. You can see here document.get element by id root. So if you see here, we have the id root over here, and in that particular tag, So what they are saying is render the app component. And if I see over here, let me start the application so that I could show you. So, all right. So now if you see, if I try and run application, so to run the application, you can see the package.json itself, we got these scripts. So to run the application, to build the application, to preview the application, there were like a few commands which we can actually run. So over here, to run this command, I need to use npm run, and then I could just tell whatever the command I need to run. So if dev is the command I need to run, I need to say dev, and you can see just say white is running over here, and from this one, so from here, let me just check. Okay, you can see it says white command not found. And whenever you encounter an error or a bug, it's always good thing. From the at least from the developer perspective, because you got a chance to learn something new which you don't know already, which is actually a good thing. Because let's say if you're developing a project and you never encounter an error or something, you're never going to learn something new. You're always going to stick with whatever you know. But whenever you hit up with the error, you're always going to learn something new, because you're in that place, you're going to know how to fix that error or how to fix that bug, which is actually a good thing for you guys. So here it says white command not found, and whenever you end up with this kind of bugs like saying this command is not found or that command is not found, that means basically that dependency is not available in your application. So basically, you might wonder, but we got these dependencies over here, then why it's saying it's the command not found? The reason is those dependencies are just listed over here, but it's not installed in our application. So to install these dependencies in our application, I need to say npm install, and this will actually install all these dependencies in my project. And now you can see a new folder called as node underscore modules folder will be created over here. That you can see, and generally over here, so let me check it. Here it says installed, and we got the node modules, and if I open the node modules, you can pretty much see a lot of folders and files being present over here. Now you might wonder, wait a minute, like let's say here or like what 9 to 10 dependencies, and here are two, like let's say as a total of 11 to 12 dependencies at max. But how come like this node underscore models folder has like several dependencies over here? So this is where things get quite interesting. So what happens is, so let's say here is the React dependency. So to build the React library, the React development team might have used several other dependencies. So let's say to build the React dependency, I might have used like 13 other dependencies. And those 13 other, other of those dependencies, let's say the first dependency has used other three dependencies to build that particular dependency. So what happens is whenever you use the command npm install, it installed all those dependencies. So let's say React dependency has 10 more dependencies, and these to build these 10 dependencies, let's say 20 more dependencies are used, and to build these 20 dependencies, another 15 dependencies are used. So totally, how much is there? like almost 45 of these, all these dependencies will be installed over here. So these are just the main dependencies which are used in our application. But to run a React, let's say I need 45 more dependencies, then all those 45 dependencies folders are being installed directly over here. So that's exactly how node underscore modules folder has lots of files and folders, because sometimes you might wonder what's happened. No, really, what's happening behind the scenes? This is exactly what's happening. You get a lot of thing over here. So now let me just fix this. Yeah. So now let me give the command npm run dev, and now you can see it has started the white server and it's running in localhost 5174. And I could just set this one up. There we go. And here, oh my god, I guess my system is stuck again. 1 minute, let me check it. Yeah, hope now everything is clear. So there we go. You can see the actual application running. So this is what you get basically. Whenever you start a React application, this is what you get. A basic React plus white combination application. So here you can see, just say count to 0, click on the white and React logos to learn more, and you get a lot of things. And whenever I click this count to just increase, this is just a basic React application. Now, as I already mentioned, if I just right click this page and click on the inspect, so here you can see inside this body tag, there is a div tag with the ID root, and inside this div tag only we have all these content like a div tag, a h1 tag, a div tag with a class name code, all these things. So if I check here, the index.html, here is the div tag with the ID root. And if I go to the app.jsx, and here is all the code where we have a div tag, the h1 tag which says white plus react and all these things. So what's exactly happening over here? So this is where the white and the core thing comes into play, and also the React DOM dependency comes into play. So basically, the React library is the one which has all the React core features. Whatever things we need to use it from React, we obviously get it from the React library. But if you remember, we also have one more dependency, which is the React DOM. So basically, the React DOM dependency is the one which actually, whatever code we are writing in React, the React entire thing, it just plays it in the HTML file. So if you see here, we have an HTML file, as I already mentioned. This HTML file is going to be just a single and the only HTML file we are going to use throughout our entire application, and to place the React code which we written inside the source folder, because whatever React code you write it only inside the source folder, you never write outside of it. That is the syntax and that is the folder structure of our React application should be. So here in the main.jsx, you can see we get the create root function from the React DOM dependency, and using that we are selecting the dom.getAllowedById root, which is this one over here, and we are trying and placing this app component, so this one, and we are placing it directly inside this div tag. So let's say for an example, if I just commented this one out, you can see nothing is visible over here, because all those content which I have in React is directly displayed in this div tag. So if I comment this div tag, nothing will be there. So if I uncomment this and let's say I have a or maybe a h1 tag and say hello world and save this. Now if I check here, you can see the hello world is right there, directly placed on top of the div tag. This is how exactly the React system works. You never touch the HTML file. Whatever changes you need to do, you directly do it inside the source folder. You create n number of files you need. You write React code and display it, but you never touch the HTML. Then you might ask why you have touched it. I just want to show how this thing works, so that's why I've given you. Okay, this is how it works. Okay, you can write direct code directly here also, because this the thing where actually the content you're seeing in your browser is getting displayed, but you never write the code over here. You always write the code inside the source folder. So if I go to the app.jsx, this is kind of the main file which we have, and from here only actually everything runs. So inside this, I could just all the code, and here I can just say return and give a h1 tag and say hello world and save this. You can just get rid of all these things and say. Now if I check here, it just says hello world. Just that. So what's actually happening here? So if you already know React, it's fine. But if you don't know, this is the first time you're coming in here. Let me explain what's this. So this is what we call as a React component. So React component is nothing but whenever you return a HTML component in a HTML tag from a JavaScript function. So a combination of that thing, combination of JavaScript and HTML. So this is what I already mentioned as the JSX syntax. Here, a React component means whenever you return a HTML tag from a JavaScript function, that is what we call as a React component. And this is what we call as a React component because we have a JavaScript function named as app, and that's exactly returning the HTML tag, which is the h1 tag. And always remember, it's just a standard naming convention. A component should always start with the capital letter because let's say if I have a component name in small letter, and let's say here also I need to export it. So basically exporting it means using trying to use this component in another file. So that is where the main.jsx comes into place. You can see import app from /app.jsx. So from here, whenever you export it as a default one, even it's small letter, if it's in small letter here, you can definitely use capital over here. It doesn't matter, it's still fine. But let's say if I try and import it in small letter and use it here also in small letter and save this, you can see nothing happens over here. Nothing. So if I just inspect and check what's exactly going wrong, you can see the tag app is unrecognized in this browser. If you need to render a React component, start its name with an uppercase letter. Because whenever you try to render a React component in a small letter, it thinks it's not a component, it's an HTML tag. So that is how React, differentiates a normal HTML tag and a React component. If it's a React component, it should start with an uppercase letter. Whereas if it's an HTML tag, it should start with a lowercase letter. If you're just working just in HTML, you won't feel this, utter importance to either go with uppercase or lowercase, because just in pure HTML, you either can use lowercase or uppercase, still the browser will understand it perfectly fine. But when it comes to React, because here you're using a combination of both JavaScript and HTML, you need to make sure that all the tags are in small letter and all the React components are in capital letter. So of course I need to bring this back to capital. While importing it also it should be in capital, and save this and we'll get back here. So that's why here also I try and make sure like here also it's in capital so that we can maintain that naming convention throughout our application. So because if we have it in small letter in some place and small letter in other place, you might end up getting confused. So that's the primary reason for this. So this is done. Now, whenever you want to write some css code, we can directly create a new css file just like this. So here they have a lot of predefined css code. I can just select all and get rid of it and save it. And you can see import dot slash app dot css file. That css file is also being imported over here. And now if I check it, so you can see the changes are nothing there. It's still over here. So let's see, is there any other CSS file? Yes, there is the index.css file. And here you can see the like few more styles being added over here. And maybe I'll try and get rid of this too. Say this. And now if I see, it's pretty clean. Because whenever you start an application, you should always start with a blank white screen. That's how the development work should start. You should never go with the predefined flow, because let's say you're building a completely brand new application, you should have a completely white screen, because in that way you can make sure you get the output what you're supposed to get. Because sometimes I've seen a lot of learners making this mistake, trying to kickstart things pretty quick and pretty easier. And what they try and do there is, okay, fine, I already have this template, I already have this background, this pretty much set up, why I need to get rid of it? Instead I'll start working on top of it. See, that won't work. That might end up giving you certain design issues which you might not expect, because those were not the code you entered. So you never know what's actually happening. So that's why whenever working in a front end application, always get rid of all the predefined styles and start writing your own styles. In that way, you can make sure, let's say if there is some extra gap somewhere, or if there is something extra here or there, or font color is different, okay, I didn't add it, then something is wrong with this code, so I need to check it. But let's say you're going with the predefined styles, you never know whether it's you added styles or it's the predefined styles. So that's why it's always important to make sure you get rid of all the predefined styles and start with it. So over here, let me get to the app.js and let me add a basic predefined style, which is, because if you see here, there is a small gap between the h1 tag and on top of my screen. You can see over here this white gap. What happens is, basically, if you see the h1 tag I added here, you can see the box element below here. And here you can see it has a margin of 21 pixel on both the top and bottom. And the reason for that is, by default, there are like a lot of HTML elements which has either a padding or a margin by default, and the value might differ. And why it's happening? Because that is the default HTML thing. Whenever you add it, HTML adds the margin or either padding. Depending upon the tags, it adds it automatically. So here again we are getting some predefined styles. So even it might be of HTML, but still it's a predefined style. So let's say I don't need a margin here, or I need just a 5 pixel margin here. So what's happening? I'm getting a 21 pixel margin there, which I don't even need. So it's always, we need to make sure we get rid of all those styles. So here I'm going to say star, and I'm going to say margin 0 and padding 0. So what this does is, the star means select pretty much every element in my web page and make sure everything has a margin 0 and padding 0 by default. So if later I need, I could just select that particular tag and add the padding and margin I need. But initially, make sure all the margin and padding are completely 0. So now if I check here, you can see the gap is gone. There's no gap. It's right there at the left top corner. So now I can start my development. So you might wonder, like, do we need to do all these things before starting the development? Yes, it's a mandatory work. We need to do it so that it makes the development work pretty easier. Otherwise, while trying to come up with the designs of styles, you might occur certain design or style issues which you didn't occur if you have done all these things, at the first. Now, so first thing is first, if you see this application, I need the to get this random advice first, and for that, I'm using an API. So if you never know what's an API, it's fine, it's good. I'll just give a small intro of it. So this is an API URL. So API basically what it does is whenever you need some data from a server, you use an API. So let's say like then what front end is not a server? No, it's not like that. Let's say there are certain terms we use so generically for a lot of things. Let's say for example two-wheeler. So when I say two-wheeler, I can say a bike as a two-wheeler, a cycle as a two-wheeler, or even a scooty as a two-wheeler. So two-wheeler is kind of like a generic term. I can use it for different vehicles. The same way server is kind of like a generic term. So you when I say server, it can be kind of how large, you might have seen in a lot of movies, some tech movies where they have this giant machines, where all the lights keep popping up, connected through big wires. That's also a server. If your application, let's say your front end application, right now I'm running it through white, that's also a server. So server is kind of too generic term. When I say server, it means a backend server where you actually get the data, where you store the data with along with the database setup. So that is what we call as a backend server. So what basically API does is whenever we need some data from the database, so because database, we never connect the database with our front end application, which is React, we never do that. Instead, we have a backend server setup. The backend server can be written in any programming language, like you can even write in JavaScript with Node.js, or you can write in Java, Python, Golang. You can written in anything. But the point here is, whenever you need some data from the database, you connect the database to the backend server, and the backend server does all the interactions. So how will you interact with the backend server then? Because from the front end, we need to interact with the backend server to get the data. So that is where the API comes into play. API is kind of a connectivity medium between the front end and the backend. So through this connectivity medium, you can get whatever data you need from the backend server through the database and to the front end. So that's how this entire thing works. So here we are using this particular API URL to get a random advice every time. So you can see if I reload this, I'll get again another data. Never buy cheap playing field. Again, if I remember, quality beats quantity. So every time I reload this URL, this gives me a random advice data. So this data and this API URL, I'm gonna use it in my React application to make sure my application just works, good. Because so this is what we call as basically a white label product where we use an existing product, takes its some certain features and build our own product. So, for example, nowadays you might have seen a lot of AI products where they use the OpenAI API. So basically, OpenAI is a completely a separate platform, but they provide APIs through which you can perform a lot of AI stuffs. So what companies and what startups does is they take the OpenAI APIs and they integrate it in their product and they come up with their own product. So this is what we call as a white label product, and here we are actually kind of doing that. We are using this advice API and trying to come up with our own product, which is advice app. So now let's see how to get all these things. So first I need to trigger the API call. So how to do that? So to make an API call, I'm gonna install one more dependency in my application. So to stop my server, I need to use Control C, and here I'll install a dependency called as Axios. So basically, Axios is a dependency through which you can make API calls from your React application. So once it's installed, we can again run the command npm run dev, and this will start my application. Let me reload it, and everything is working fine. Now I can use Axios from here. So I could say import Axios from Axios, and I'm gonna write a function inside this to make that API call. Function get advice, and this function is gonna be an asynchronous function. So I'll use the async keyword. because generally whenever I make an API call, it's actually gonna be. So whenever I make an API call, is actually returns a thing called as promise. So whenever I make an API call, it returns something called as promise. So just like as the term mentions, it's just like how we promise something to someone else. So let's say I promise you like I'll finish this stream successfully. So that's a promise I'm giving to you. So either I can, succeed on my promise or I can fail on my promise. So if I succeed, that means I have finished the live stream successfully. If I fail, that means I couldn't finish this live stream successfully. So these are the two promises, at the end state. Whereas there is one more state which is I'm trying to keep up my promise. So that is the third state. Because let's say I'm trying to right now I'm trying to finish this live stream, which means I'm working towards keeping my promise. So at the end only you'll know whether I succeeded or whether I failed. That's an end result. But there is one more possible state over here, which is the working state. The same way in JavaScript, the promise has three states. One is the waiting state, other one is the resolved state, other one is the rejected state. So basically, waiting state is the initial state where whenever we make an API call, it returns us a promise with the saying like the promise is in the waiting state. And then there are two states. One is the rejected and the other one is the resolved. Rejected means if the API call ends up with an error, then the promise will give the rejection state. That means it's saying like the API call ended up with error and this is the error. And let's say if the promise succeeds after the waiting state, then the promise will be resolved and we'll get the actual data from the API. So these are the three states we have with the promise, and the API, whenever we make an API call, it returns us with a promise. So now we are going to do that. So from here, to handle this promise, I always need to use a await keyword because I never know when this promise might get resolved or rejected. As you, if you're watching this live stream, you have no idea like at what time it's gonna end, because I know, because I already did this project, so I know how long it's gonna take. But you guys are never gonna know, like at this point of time, you're not gonna know like how long it's gonna take to finish this project. So that means you're gonna keep waiting. So that is what actually a promise does. It will keep on waiting until it's get rejected or resolved. So for that, I need to use a keyword called as await. And to use that await keyword, I need to make sure that the function is async. So here I could say const response is equal to await axios.get. So inside the axios there is a function called as get, and here I could put the URL and say log response, and outside this I could just call this function and save this. So to just go over here, inspect and check the console, you can see we got an object, and if I open this you can see there is a field called as data. And if I open the data, there is another field called as slip. And if I open the slip, there is this advice. When something goes wrong in life, blah blah blah, we got this advice. So which means we are able to make the API call properly because we are getting the data, and that means we are getting the data in the right manner. So that's it. It's done. Is it? Yes, it's done because we are getting the data. Now the next thing is just to display the data. So now this is where we are going to use certain React hooks. So basically React hooks or certain React features through which we can actually do certain things out of the box in React. So the first hook I'm going to use is called as useState. So all the hooks in React start with the name called as useState. So whenever I say hook, don't get function, don't get confused like it's something else. Hooks are nothing but those are just JavaScript functions, but each hook has its own purpose. Like it's kind of like having a special power. Let's say I can throw fire. So let's say I'm the fireman. Let's say I can fly, so I'm the Superman. So like depending on the powers, we name each comic characters, right? The same way, hooks also has its own purpose. So here the use state hook, it has its own power, which from the name you can easily understand, it helps us to maintain the state of a data. So for example, inside this use state, I need to mention the initial value. So let's say I just give empty quotes, and here I say advice, and the second thing is going to be set advice. So set advice is a function, and the first one is a variable. So let's say here if I just log the advice variable, you can see it just gives me an empty string over here. So let me just get rid of this one. Alright. Because of the strict mode, what happens is when a whatever prints in the console, it gets logged twice. Right now you can see just gets logged one time. So it kinds of keep irritating. So that's why. So now let us get back here. So initially it's an empty string, so it prints nothing. So let's say if I say for geeks, save this. Now you can see it says geeks for geeks. So what's happening? So whatever the initial value I pass over here, that is directly correlated to the variable over here, which is the advice variable, which is the variable named as advice. So now, initially I'm just going to keep this empty because in this variable only I'm later on going to store the response which I'm getting from the API. So how I can set it? So if you remember in the response, I have a field called as data, and inside that I have a field called as slip, and inside that I have a field called as advice. So pretty much this one, slip and advice, but on top of it I have another field called as data. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to say set advice, and inside this I'm going to pass whatever value I need to pass. So let's say I'm just going to say response dot data dot slip dot advice. So this basically sets that advice value to the advice variable. Now comes the next question, like how can I trigger this function? So to trigger it, for now I'm gonna have a button, say get advice, and whenever I click this button I'm gonna trigger this function. So to do that, I can directly add an event listener. So here I'm gonna have an event listener, say on click, and here I can directly mention that function. So this is what a JSX syntax look like. You can directly write HTML and JavaScript code together. You can see directly inside the HTML code I have mentioned a JavaScript function. So you can directly mention any JavaScript code by just putting a curly brace and writing it. It's as simple as it is. So now what happens is whenever I click this button, the get advice function gets triggered. So I can just show you. So initially the advice variable is empty. So I could just have a come over here and save this. Okay, initially the advice is empty. Now if I click get advice, you can see the advice variable is saying when hugging arm with both arms and apply reasonable affectionate pressure. So it's giving us an advice. So if I click the get advice button again, you can see again it comes up with a new advice. So what's happening currently is whenever I click that button, it's triggering the function, which is the get advice function, which makes an API call, get the response, and whenever I'm using the set advice function, it actually stores that variable in the stores that value in this variable, and that's what we are actually getting printed over here. It's a good thing. It's actually a good thing because right now we are able to get a random advice and we are even able to store it. So now let's actually display it. So here I'm gonna have a div tag, and inside this I'm gonna have one more div tag. Here I'm gonna have a h1 tag, and directly to display the variable, as I already mentioned, I could put a curly brace and mention JavaScript things, which are a variable, a function, anything. So I'm mentioning a JavaScript variable, and then I'll have the button. So I can just get rid of this console log for now, because now I can actually see the advice on my screen. So now if I click this, you can see every time it gives an advice. Sometimes advices are not good, so don't follow it. Just work on the application. So now we can actually see whenever I click it, it gives me a random advice, which somehow good as I actually mentioned. So now I'm able to actually get the advices and do things really good. All right, now the application is working well, at least for now. So let us do certain styles for this so that it will look much better. So for this one, I'm gonna give a class name as container. For this div tag, I'm gonna give a class name of code. Save this. I can go to the app.css, and for the container class name, I'm gonna have a, let's say, a linear background, a linear gradient CSS. So I just go to the Google and search for it, and I could actually generate a linear gradient like how exactly I want. All right, so here you can see that linear gradient code. I could just copy the code and put it right down here. Save this, and if I check my website, you can see I got this. I got that nice looking linear gradient background. Now here you can see it's just taking the height of the content. So I need to make sure it takes the entire height. So I'll just give height as 100% and I'll check. Is any change happening? No. The reason is because the tag outside this, if I inspect, which is the root, so this should take the height fully. So I'll say take height 100%. So nothing happens. So I'll go to the body tag and say height 100%. Still nothing happens. So which means it's not taking the entire height of the screen, which is not good for us for our application. So to fix that, so I'm going to say take height as 100 bh. So which means view height. So whatever the viewable area available in my screen, just take the entire height of that. So now if I check here, you can see it just takes the entire height of the screen. So now this is looking good. Now I need to make sure this content looks good in the center. So to do that, so I'm going to select this card name and have some styles. So here for the card class name, I'm going to say give it a background color of white. Uh, Save this and see. All right. Let's reduce the width of this to maybe like 75% of the screen size. Maybe I think 50 would be much better. 15% of the screen size. That's good. And I'll have a padding on all the sides, maybe 50 pixels. There it is. And maybe I'll have well, radius of 30. And to give some rounded edges, I'll have a border radius of 25 pixels. And it's looking good. So to give it a little bit of shadow effect, I can use a box shadow. So I could just again go to Google and search for box shadow generator, and you can find a lot of websites. You can use anyone. This generally gives us with the shadow effect, like how exactly you want the shadow. So I could just fix it in the exact way I want. All right, and here is a box shadow code. I could just copy the code, come down here, and put the code. That is the shadow. So now we need the button to be in the center. So I would say the button inside the card tag to be in text align center. I'll just give you a text align center. There it is. And then I'll also add the styles for the button. I'll say uh, background to be white, outline to be none, and maybe I'll increase the font size to be like 14 pixels. All right. Border, I'll change the border to 1 pixel solid blue color. All right. I'll give it a padding of 12 pixels left and right 20. So if I give two values, which means the first value is for the top and bottom padding, and the second value is for the left and right padding. So if I check here, okay, that's looking good. And I'll give it a border radius again, 12 pixels maybe, and see. Maybe I'll increase it to 25. Okay, that's looking good. I'll have a margin on top of it. Margin top maybe of 12 pixels. That's good. So now the chord is in the top left corner. I need to bring it to the center. So directly in the container class, I'm gonna give it a display of flex, justify content center, and align. Justify content center brings it, vertically to the sorry horizontally to the center of the screen, and also to bring it vertically to the center of the screen, I could just say align item center, and this brings it vertically also to the center of the screen. And now I'll also have one more thing, so you can see whenever I hover over the get advice button, I can just change my cursor just to show it like a clickable one. So I'll say cursor pointer. So now if I you can see it always makes it like a clickable one. So if I click this, it obviously gives me a random advice every time when I click it. The application looks good. It looks pretty good. But there is one last final piece missing in this application, which is if I reload this application, you can see initially the first time the application looks empty. Like it doesn't have any advice to begin with at the first time. So what I can do? So initially, whenever I load my application, I need to load an advice, which means initially for the first time, I need to trigger this function without any button click or anything. So to do this, there is one more hook called as use effect. So inside this, I can write two parameters inside the use effect. One is a callback function and another one is an empty array. So here, I could inside this, I could just call the advice function. So basically, what the use effect hook does is, whenever my entire component is getting rendered at the initial time alone, the use effect runs whatever things I've given inside only one time when the array is empty. So let's say here in this case, as the array is empty, what use effect does is it calls a get advice function for the very first time only once. After that, it never runs it. Because after that, I have this button to trigger the get advice function. So now if I see, reload the application, initially, you can see initially for a second it's just empty. For the very first time, it's just you can see there is kind of like a glitch. So what I could do is instead of an empty text, I could just say loading like this. So now if I reload, you can literally see it says loading, and then you get an advice. And after that, every time I click it, I can literally get a new advice. So this makes sure our application is always up and ready to go. I literally see it from here. So there we go. We got the advice application up and running using React and an API. So hope you guys enjoyed the live stream. And if you guys have any doubts, any questions, please always ask it in the comment section. I know, feel free to do it. So hope you learned a lot of amazing and interesting things today in the live session. And any doubts, you can always ask it in the drop as a comment. And try this application. Try and try to finish this application. And if you successfully got it, it's a great thing because even without knowing React, you can definitely build this application because I pretty much covered each and every nook and corner of the application, trying to make sure even if you're a beginner, if you know a little bit of React, you can do this project because this is just a kickstarting project if you're a React learner, and this will be a nice project to do. Hope you guys enjoyed this live stream. Thank you so much, guys.